I was standing in my gravel driveway at 7 in the morning when I saw the tow truck backing up toward my 1972 John Deere tractor. And that's when I knew my peaceful Tuesday was about to go completely sideways. My name is Yates Ingram, and I had lived in this house just outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa for 3 years now. The property sat on 2 acres of land that I had purchased fair and square, complete with an old barn, a decent-sized workshop, and enough room to keep my vintage tractor collection without bothering anyone. Or so I thought. The neighborhood had changed over the past year. What used to be a quiet rural area with large properties and friendly neighbors had slowly transformed into something that made my stomach turn. A new development called Meadowbrook Estates had sprung up on the adjacent land, bringing with it cookie-cutter houses, manicured lawns, and worst of all, a homeowners association that seemed to think their jurisdiction extended beyond their actual property lines. I walked quickly across my lawn toward the tow truck, my coffee mug still in hand. The driver, a thin guy in his 20s with a patchy beard, was hooking chains to my tractor's front axle. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" I called out, my voice cutting through the morning air. The driver looked up, startled. "Just doing my job, sir. Got a work order here to remove this vehicle." "That's not a vehicle. That's a tractor, and it's on my property." He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "Says here it's in violation of community standards." Been sitting on the road for over 2 weeks. I felt my blood pressure rising. The road? This is my driveway, my property. A familiar white Mercedes SUV pulled up behind the tow truck, and my day got exponentially worse. Out stepped Veronica Garrett, the president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. She was in her late 40s, with that particular haircut that seemed to be standard issue for people in her position. You know the one. Blonde highlights, shorter in the back, always perfectly styled. She wore a pink blazer over white pants and her heels clicked against the pavement as she approached. "Mr. Ingram," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so glad we finally caught you at home." "Caught me? I live here, and you're trespassing." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of glass. "Hardly. We're simply enforcing the community standards that everyone agreed to when they purchased property in this area." "I didn't agree to anything. I'm not part of your HOA." Veronica pulled out a folder from her oversized purse. "Actually, when the Meadowbrook Estates development was approved, the county reclassified this entire area as part of our jurisdiction. You received notice 6 months ago." I remembered that letter. I had laughed at it and thrown it away, assuming it was some kind of scam or mistake. That's not how property rights work. You can't just declare yourself in charge of land you don't own. "The county records would disagree with you," she said, that smile never leaving her face. "Now, this eyesore of a tractor has been visible from the main road for weeks. It's bringing down property values and violating our strict vehicle storage policies." The tow truck driver was looking increasingly uncomfortable, his eyes darting between us. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "First of all, that tractor is a classic. It's worth more than your Mercedes. Second, it's not on any public road. It's parked in my driveway on my property. Third, you have no authority here." Veronica's smile tightened. "I have all the authority I need, Mr. Ingram. You have 2 choices. You can allow us to remove this violation, or we can file a lien against your property and take you to court. Your choice." I looked at the tow truck driver. "Don't touch my tractor." He hesitated, his hands still on the chains. Veronica pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police if you interfere with this legal removal." "Go ahead," I said. "I'd love to have them here to witness you trespassing and attempting to steal my property." Her finger hovered over her phone screen. We stood there in a standoff for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, she lowered her phone. "Fine, but you'll be hearing from our attorney, and you'll be receiving daily fines of $500 until this violation is corrected." "Send the bills," I said. "I'll use them as kindling." Veronica gestured to the tow truck driver, who gratefully unhooked the chains from my tractor and started packing up his equipment. She gave me one last withering look before climbing back into her Mercedes and driving off, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. I stood there for a long moment after they left, my coffee now cold in my hand. My neighbor from across the street, an older man named Herbert Wilson who had lived here longer than anyone, walked over from his mailbox. "They tried to get my boat last month," he said, shaking his head. "Said it was an unauthorized recreational vehicle. I've had that boat parked in my side yard for 15 years. "What did you do?" "Moved it behind my house. Didn't want the hassle." He looked at my tractor. "You're not going to move it, are you?" "Not a chance," I said. Herbert smiled. "Good. Someone needs to stand up to them. They've been terrorizing everyone since that development went in. Mrs. Chen down the road got fined because her fence was the wrong shade of white." Wrong shade of white. Can you believe that? I could believe it. I'd heard stories about HOAs gone mad, but I'd never expected to be caught up in one myself. That afternoon, I drove into town to visit the county recorder's office. If Veronica claimed they had legal jurisdiction over my property, I needed to see the actual documents. The office was in an old brick building downtown, with creaky wooden floors and the smell of old paper permeating everything. A woman named Patricia at the front desk helped me pull up the records for my property. We spent an hour going through documents on her computer screen, and what I found made my stomach sink. The county had indeed approved an expansion of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA boundaries 6 months ago. The new boundaries included my property and several others on my street. However, as I read through the fine print, I noticed something interesting. The expansion was approved contingent on all property owners being properly notified and given the opportunity to opt out within 90 days. I definitely had not been properly notified. A single letter that could easily be mistaken for junk mail did not constitute proper notification according to the county's own rules, but there was something else, something that made me start to smile. "Can you pull up the plot map for this area?" I asked Patricia. She clicked around for a moment, then brought up a detailed survey map of the entire neighborhood. I studied it carefully, tracing property lines with my finger on the screen. "Can you print this for me?" "Sure thing, honey." As the map printed, I made some quick measurements and calculations. Then I asked Patricia to pull up one more set of documents, the original deeds for the properties on my street. What I found was gold. My property, which I had purchased from the estate of a man named Theodore Carlson, included something that none of the other properties had. A private right-of-way that extended from my property line all the way to the main county road. The driveway that everyone used to access my property, including that driveway where my tractor sat, wasn't a public road at all. It was mine. I owned it. The previous owner had negotiated that right-of-way decades ago, before any of the other houses were built, to ensure access to his property. The deed was crystal clear. I own not just the house and the 2 acres around it, but also the 60-foot wide strip of land that served as the access road. More importantly, several of the new Meadowbrook Estates houses used that same road to access their properties. They had been granted easement rights by the previous owner, but those easements were specific to access only. The road itself was private property, my private property. I paid for copies of all the documents and drove home with my mind racing. If the road was mine, then Veronica and her tow truck hadn't just been on my driveway. They had been on my private road, which meant they were definitely trespassing. But I needed to be sure. I needed a lawyer. I called my old college roommate, Dennis Payton, who practiced real estate law in Des Moines. We had stayed in touch over the years, mostly through occasional beers and texts during football season. When I explained the situation, he started laughing. "You're kidding me. You actually own the access road, according to these deeds, yes. Can you look at them, scan them, and send them over? This is the most interesting thing I've heard all week." I scanned everything and emailed it to him. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Yates, this is beautiful. You absolutely own that road. The easements granted for access are valid, but they're limited in scope. The HOA has no jurisdiction over your private road whatsoever. So they can't fine me for what I park on my own road. They can't fine you for parking a UFO on your own road. It's private property, and if they try to tow your tractor, that's attempted theft." "What should I do?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to fight them, or do you want them to leave you alone?" "Both," he laughed again. "I like it. Here's what we do. I'll draft a cease and desist letter laying out the legal facts. We'll send it certified mail so they can't claim they didn't receive it. That should be enough to back them off. But if you really want to make a point, we can restrict their access." "What do you mean? You own the road." "The easements allow access, but you can put conditions on that access. Gates, speed limits, parking restrictions. As long as you're not blocking their legal right to reach their properties, you can do whatever you want with your road." An idea was forming in my mind. How much would this cost? For the letter, a couple $100. If they fight back and we need to go to court, could be a few thousand. But honestly, once they see the deed records, they'd be idiots to push it. No judge would side with them. "Draft the letter," I said, "and let's set up a time for you to come out here. I want to show you something." Over the next few days, I did my research. I measured the road, reviewed the easement agreements, and checked with the county about what I could and couldn't do with a private road. Everything Dennis said was correct. The road was mine to do with as I pleased, as long as I didn't block access. I also did some digging into Veronica Garrett and the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. What I found was disturbing. Over the past year, they had filed liens against 3 different properties for unpaid fines. One family had been forced to sell their house because they couldn't afford to fight the legal battle. Another had paid over $15,000 in fines and legal fees for violations that included having the wrong mailbox style and planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. The HOA had accumulated significant cash reserves from these fines and legal settlements. Veronica herself was paid a salary of $80,000 a year as president, which seemed excessive for a volunteer position in a neighborhood of maybe 100 houses. It was starting to look less like a homeowners association and more like a protection racket. The cease and desist letter arrived at Veronica's house on Friday morning. I know because I was working in my front yard when I saw the postal carrier deliver it and watched through my window as she signed for it. About an hour later, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Ingram, this is Linda Morrison from Morrison, Hecht and Associates. I'm the attorney for the Meadowbrook Estates HOA." Her voice was crisp and professional. "I'm calling regarding the letter we received from your attorney. What about it?" "Mr. Ingram, I understand you believe you own the access road, but I need to inform you that the HOA has maintained that road for over a year. We've paid for resurfacing, snow removal, and regular maintenance. That establishes a claim of adverse possession." I almost laughed. Adverse possession requires continuous use for 10 years in Iowa. You've barely had 1 year, she paused. You've done your homework. My attorney has. And the deed records are clear. The road is mine. Even if that's true, interfering with the easement rights of the homeowners would be illegal. I'm not planning to interfere with anyone's legal access, but I am planning to enforce my property rights. Your client has been trespassing, making threats, and attempting to steal my property. That stops now. Linda's voice took on a harder edge. The HOA has significant legal resources, Mr. Ingram. I would strongly advise against escalating this situation. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. HOA disputes can become very expensive very quickly. Then I suggest your client backs off. Because I'm not moving my tractor, I'm not paying their fake fines, and if anyone sets foot on my property without permission again, I'll call the police. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly. I wasn't used to confrontation like this, but something about the whole situation made my blood boil. These people had moved into the area and decided they could just take over, imposing their rules on everyone whether they agreed or not. That weekend, I made a decision. If they wanted to play games, I could play games too. I drove to a farm supply store in Marion and purchased several things. A heavy-duty gate with a keypad lock, metal posts and concrete, a large sign, and some chain. On Sunday morning, Herbert came over to help me install the gate right at the point where my private road connected to the main county road. It took most of the day, but by evening we had a sturdy gate in place with a keypad entry system. The sign I installed next to it read, "Private Road. Property of Yates Ingram. Access by permission only. Violators will be prosecuted." I programmed the keypad with a code and then made copies of it for Herbert and the other neighbors on my street who needed access. The Meadowbrook Estates residents, however, would need to come through me. I didn't lock the gate that night. I wanted to give everyone fair warning. Monday morning, I got a call from Herbert. "There's a crowd at your gate." I walked down to the road and found about a dozen Meadowbrook residents standing around, looking at the gate and sign. Several cars were backed up, waiting to get through. Veronica was at the front of the group, her face red. "You cannot block a public road," she shouted when she saw me. "It's not a public road, it's my private road. The sign explains that clearly." "This is insane. People need to get to work." "Then they should use the main access to Meadowbrook Estates, the one on the other side of the development." A man in a business suit stepped forward. "That's 3 miles out of the way. This has always been the shortcut." "This has always been my property," I said calmly. "Which you've been using without permission. But I'm a reasonable person. Anyone who needs access can have it, for a small fee." Veronica's eyes widened. "A fee?" "Standard right-of-way usage fee, $50 per vehicle per month, covers maintenance, snow removal, and general upkeep of the road." "That's extortion." "No, that's property rights. You've been getting free use of my road for a year. But since you've decided to make my life difficult, I've decided to exercise my legal rights. Anyone who wants a code for the gate can contact me. First month is due upfront." The crowd erupted in angry voices, but I held up my hand. "Or you can use the main entrance like you're supposed to. It's your choice." I walked back to my house, leaving them arguing among themselves. Within an hour, I got my first payment request email, then another. By end of day, I had 15 people willing to pay for gate access. At $50 each, that was $750 a month. I almost felt guilty. Almost. But 2 Meadowbrook Estates board members, including Veronica, refused, which meant they had to use the longer route. And that made me smile every single morning when I saw them drive past on the county road, headed the long way around. Dennis called me Tuesday evening. "I heard you installed a gate. News travels fast." The HOA attorney called me today. She's threatening legal action. Let them try. Yates, I have to ask, are you doing this to prove a point, or are you actually trying to collect fees? Both, I said honestly. They tried to bully me. They tried to steal my property. They've been terrorizing the whole neighborhood. Someone needs to show them they can't just do whatever they want. I'm with you, Dennis said, but be prepared. They're going to fight back. He was right. Wednesday afternoon, I came home from getting groceries to find an inspector from the county standing in my driveway. He was a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a tired expression. "Yates Ingram," he asked. "That's me. I'm Ron Fletcher, County Building Inspector. I received a complaint about illegal construction on your property, the gate, and several other issues. Unpermitted structures, possible zoning violations, environmental concerns." I felt my jaw tighten. "Let me guess. The HOA filed the complaint." Ron looked uncomfortable. "I can't disclose who filed the complaint, but I am required to investigate. Do you mind if I look around?" "Do you have a warrant?" "I don't need one for external visual inspection, but I'd appreciate your cooperation." I thought about refusing, but Ron seemed like a decent guy just doing his job. "Fine. Look around. Everything on this property is legal and permitted." He spent the next hour walking my land, taking notes and photos. He checked the gate, examined my barn, looked at my workshop, and even counted my tractor collection. Finally, he came back to where I was waiting on my porch. "Mr. Ingram, I don't see any violations. The gate is on your private property and doesn't block the public right-of-way. Your structures all appear to predate current zoning requirements, so they're grandfathered in. And while you have a lot of tractors, there's no ordinance against collecting farm equipment in a rural area. So we're done." "Not quite. I need to do a full inspection of your barn and workshop. The complaint alleged you might be running an unlicensed business." "I restore tractors as a hobby. I've sold maybe 2 in the last 3 years. That's not a business." Ron nodded. "I believe you. But I still need to document everything. Can we schedule a time for the interior inspection?" We scheduled it for Friday. After he left, I called Dennis again. "They're retaliating," I told him, "using the county to harass me. That's illegal if we can prove it, but hard to prove." "Did the inspector say who filed the complaint?" He wouldn't tell me. "But who else would it be? Keep records of everything," Dennis advised. "Dates, times, names. If this becomes a pattern of harassment, we can file our own complaints." Thursday morning, I woke up to find orange stickers on my tractors. Code violation notices. Someone had come onto my property during the night and slapped them on every piece of equipment I owned. That was it. That was the line. I called the sheriff's office and filed a report for trespassing and vandalism. A deputy named Sarah Kowalski came out to take my statement. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "When did you discover the stickers?" she asked, taking notes. "About 7 this morning. They weren't here when I went to bed at 11. Any cameras on the property?" "No." I mentally kicked myself for not thinking of that sooner. Deputy Kowalski examined the stickers. "These aren't official county notices. They're fake. Someone printed these up to look official." "The HOA," I said. "You think the homeowners association is behind this?" I explained the whole situation, from the tow truck incident to the gate to the inspector visit. She listened carefully, her expression growing more concerned. "Mr. Ingram, this sounds like harassment. But unless you have proof of who placed these stickers, there's not much I can do except file a report. What if they do it again? Install cameras. Document everything. And if you catch them on your property again, call us immediately." After she left, I drove straight to an electronics store in Cedar Rapids and bought a complete security camera system. 4 cameras with night vision and motion detection, plus a DVR to record everything. I spent the rest of the day installing them, positioning them to cover my driveway, the gate, my barn, and the side yard where most of my tractors were parked. That night, I tested the system. Crystal clear footage, accessible from my phone. If anyone set foot on my property again, I'd have proof. Friday, Ron the inspector came back for the interior inspection. He was thorough but fair, examining my workshop, checking electrical outlets, looking at my storage setup. After an hour, he signed off on everything. "You're cleaner than most hobby shops I've seen," he admitted. "Whoever filed that complaint was wasting everyone's time." "Can I get that in writing? I'll send you a full report. No violations found." That should have been the end of it. But Friday evening, I got an email from Veronica Garrett. It was long and full of legal-sounding language, but the gist was clear. The HOA was filing a lawsuit against me for blocking access, creating a public nuisance, and violating community standards. I forwarded it to Dennis, who called me back within minutes. "They're bluffing," he said. "This lawsuit would be thrown out in the first hearing. They have no legal standing." So what do I do? Nothing. Let them file. Let them waste their money on legal fees. We'll file a motion to dismiss, and when the judge sees the deed records, it'll be over. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Saturday morning, my security cameras caught something interesting. At 2:30 in the morning, a black SUV pulled up to my gate. 2 figures got out, faces hidden by hoodies, and tried to cut the lock with bolt cutters. The lock held, and after a few minutes they gave up and left. I had the footage. Clear enough to see the vehicle make and model, though the license plate was obscured. I called Deputy Kowalski, and she came out Saturday afternoon to review the footage. "That's definitely attempted vandalism," she said. "Maybe attempted breaking and entering. Can you get a better view of the plate?" We enhanced the footage on my computer, and after some work, we could just make out the license number. Sarah ran it through her system. It's registered to a woman named Brenda Hayes in Meadowbrook Estates. Is she on the HOA board? I don't know, but I'll pay her a visit. Sunday afternoon, Sarah came back to my house with news. I talked to Brenda Hayes. She claims her car was borrowed by her neighbor Friday night. A woman named Veronica Garrett. My heart started pounding. Did she admit it? Mrs. Hayes gave a statement, but when I went to talk to Mrs. Garrett, she denied everything. Said she was home all night and her husband backed her up. What about the video? The faces aren't visible enough for a positive ID. I can't make an arrest based on this alone, but I did file a report and I warned Mrs. Garrett that we're investigating. So she gets away with it. Sarah looked frustrated. For now. But if she tries anything else, we'll have a pattern of behavior. That helps with charges. I spent the rest of Sunday fuming. They had actually tried to destroy my gate. They had trespassed, committed vandalism, and then lied to the police, and they were getting away with it. Monday morning, I sent an email to everyone who had paid for gate access. In it, I explained what had happened and included screenshots from the security footage, with faces blurred but the situation clear. I wanted them to know what their HOA leadership was doing. The response was immediate and overwhelming. I got dozens of replies from Meadowbrook residents expressing shock and support. Several people I'd never met called me directly to apologize for the HOA's behavior. One call was particularly interesting. A woman named Martha Chen, who Herbert had mentioned before, called me Monday evening. "Mr. Ingram, I've lived here for 20 years. I watched this neighborhood change, and not for the better. A group of us have been trying to recall Veronica and the board for months, but we haven't had enough support. Until now." "What do you mean?" Your email opened a lot of eyes. People are angry. If we can get signatures from 60% of the HOA members, we can force a special election and remove the entire board. How can I help? Just keep doing what you're doing. Stand up to them. Show people they don't have to be afraid. Over the next week, things escalated in ways I hadn't expected. The lawsuit was officially filed, which meant I had to hire Dennis formally and start preparing for court. That was going to cost money, even though Dennis gave me a friendly discount. But something else was happening in Meadowbrook Estates. Martha and her group were organizing. They set up a website detailing all the HOA's overreaches and abuses. They collected stories from residents who had been fined for ridiculous violations. They held meetings, and people started talking. The local newspaper in Cedar Rapids ran a story about HOA abuse, featuring my situation and several others. A TV news crew from Iowa City came out and interviewed me on camera, standing next to my vintage tractor with my gate visible in the background. The story went viral locally. Suddenly, everyone was talking about the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and their overreach. Comments poured in online from people who had dealt with similar situations. Other HOAs in the area started getting scrutiny. Veronica didn't take it well. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I came home to find her standing in front of my gate with a film crew. Not news, this was clearly some kind of personal video. She was speaking directly to the camera, gesturing at my property. I pulled up and got out of my truck. "Can I help you?" She turned, her face flushed. "You've ruined everything. Do you understand that? Property values are dropping. People are talking about disbanding the HOA entirely. Years of work destroyed." "Good," I said. "Maybe the next HOA will actually follow the law. This is your fault, your stubbornness. Your refusal to just follow simple rules. They're not rules that apply to me. I'm not part of your HOA." The person holding the camera, a young man with expensive equipment, looked uncomfortable. Veronica was shaking now, her voice rising. "I will not let you destroy this community. We will win that lawsuit. We will force you to remove that gate, and we will collect every penny you owe in fines." "You'll try," I said, "but the law isn't on your side." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You have no idea what we're capable of." That sent a chill down my spine. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." She turned and walked back to her Mercedes, the camera guy hurrying after her. I immediately went inside and called Deputy Kowalski to report the incident. "She's getting desperate," Sarah said after I described the encounter. "Desperate people do stupid things. Keep your cameras running and stay alert." That night, at 3:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my security system. I pulled up the camera app and my blood ran cold. There were 4 people on my property, dressed in dark clothes, approaching my barn. They were carrying gas cans. I called 911 while pulling on clothes with one hand. "This is Yates Ingram at 2847 Hickory Lane. There are intruders on my property with what appears to be accelerant. I think they're trying to burn down my barn." The dispatcher kept me on the line while I threw on shoes and grabbed a flashlight. She told me to stay inside, that deputies were on the way. But my entire tractor collection was in that barn. 50 years of history. Machines I'd restored with my own hands. I couldn't just let them burn. I turned on every exterior light I had. The property lit up like a stadium. The 4 figures froze, caught in the sudden glare. Then they scattered, dropping the gas cans and running. I ran out the front door, my phone still recording through the camera app. I could hear sirens in the distance. The intruders were running toward the back of my property, toward the fence line that separated my land from Meadowbrook Estates. My cameras caught everything. Their faces, their clothes, their panicked flight. One of them tripped and fell, and when she got up, her hood had fallen back. It was Veronica. The deputies arrived 4 minutes later, which felt like an eternity. Sarah was one of 3 officers who responded. I showed them the footage on my phone, and I watched Sarah's expression harden when she saw Veronica's face clearly visible in the recording. "That's attempted arson," she said. "And you got her on camera. This is enough for an arrest warrant." 2 of the other intruders were caught trying to climb back over the fence into Meadowbrook. They were detained immediately. The 4th got away, but the cameras had footage of all of them. The gas cans were collected as evidence. The 2 who were caught, both men in their 30s, were arrested on the spot. They were read their rights, handcuffed, and put into separate patrol cars. Sarah called for backup, and within 20 minutes, there were 6 sheriff's vehicles on my property and in front of Veronica's house. I watched as deputies knocked on her door. Her husband answered, confused and angry. Then they brought Veronica out in handcuffs. She was still wearing the same dark clothes from the security footage. Her expression was no longer angry or superior. She looked terrified. I gave my statement to the sheriff himself, a gruff man in his 50s named Tom Bradley. He watched the security footage multiple times, made copies, and took extensive notes. "Mr. Ingram, you may have just saved your barn and possibly your life," he said. "If they had managed to light that fire with you inside the house, this would have been a very different situation." "Will they go to jail for attempted arson?" "Absolutely. This is a serious felony. They're looking at years in prison if convicted." The sun was coming up by the time all the statements were taken and the evidence was collected. I was exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. Herbert came over as the last sheriff's vehicle was leaving. "I saw the commotion," he said. "Are you okay?" I told him everything. His face went pale. "My God, Yates, they could have killed you. They were that desperate to get rid of me. This is insane. Over a tractor and a gate, over control," I said. "They couldn't accept that someone wouldn't bend to their authority." The story exploded. By noon, every news outlet in Iowa was reporting on the attempted arson. The HOA president arrested for trying to burn down a neighbor's barn made for sensational headlines. National news picked it up by evening. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, friends I hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanted to know what happened. I stopped answering and let it go to voicemail. Dennis called around 2 in the afternoon. "Have you seen the news?" "I'm living the news." "The HOA just dropped their lawsuit." They issued a statement saying Veronica was acting independently and not on behalf of the organization. You believe that? Not for a second. But they're trying to distance themselves from her. Smart move legally. What about the criminal charges? That's out of my area, but from what I'm hearing, the DA is taking this very seriously. Attempted arson with intent to destroy property. They might add conspiracy charges if they can prove the others knew what they were planning. They're looking at significant prison time. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Veronica, a man named Craig Donovan, and a woman named Susan Mitchell were held on $500,000 bail each. The 4th person, who turned out to be Veronica's brother visiting from Minnesota, turned himself in 3 days later after seeing his face on the news. I attended the preliminary hearing. The courtroom was packed with media and curious onlookers. Veronica looked diminished in her orange jumpsuit, her perfect hair now limp and unstyled. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The prosecution presented the security footage. It was damning. You could see them approach the barn, pour gasoline along the base of the building, and only stop when the lights came on. Veronica's face was clearly visible. There was no defense against that evidence. The judge, A stern woman named Patricia Holloway set bail at $1 million each and scheduled a trial date for 3 months out. Veronica started crying. The reality of her situation was clearly sinking in. Outside the courthouse, I was swarmed by reporters. I gave a brief statement. I'm grateful to law enforcement for their quick response. This situation got out of hand because one person decided they were above the law. I hope this serves as a lesson about the dangers of unchecked authority in homeowners associations. That quote was everywhere by evening. In Meadowbrook Estates, things were changing rapidly. The recall effort Martha had started succeeded beyond her expectations. Within a week of the arrests, they had signatures from 85% of the HOA members. The entire board was removed, and a special election was scheduled. Martha called me the day after the recall succeeded. We're dissolving the HOA entirely. People have had enough. Can you do that? With a 75% vote, yes. We're going to have that vote next month. The bylaws will be dissolved and we'll form a neighborhood association instead. Voluntary membership, no enforcement power, just a group for maintaining common areas and organizing community events. That's how it should have been from the start. I know. Thank you, Yates. None of this would have happened without you standing up to them. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd been pushed too far and pushed back. But if it helped the neighborhood, I was glad. The trial took place in late August, 4 months after the attempted arson. I testified about the escalating conflict, the harassment, the threats. The prosecution showed the security footage, the gas cans, the evidence of premeditation. They proved that Veronica had purchased the gas cans earlier that evening and had coordinated with the others through text messages that were recovered from their phones. The texts were chilling. "Tonight we end this problem," Veronica had written. "He won't be so smug with no barn and no tractors." The defense tried to argue that they never intended to actually light the fire, that it was just meant to scare me. But the prosecution brought in a fire investigator who testified that the amount of gasoline they had brought was more than enough to completely destroy the barn and potentially spread to my house. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found all 4 defendants guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Veronica received 8 years in prison. The others received between 5 and 7 years each, with credit for time served. The judge was harsh in her remarks. "You targeted a law-abiding citizen because he refused to submit to your illegal authority. You escalated a civil dispute into a criminal conspiracy that could have resulted in death. You showed no remorse, no recognition of the severity of your actions. This community and society at large need to be protected from people who believe they are above the law." Veronica cried through the entire sentencing. Her husband filed for divorce 2 days later. Life slowly returned to normal after that, or at least a new version of normal. The gate remained, but I changed the access policy. Anyone who needed to use the road could do so for free. I removed the fees and gave everyone the code. The gate stayed mostly as a reminder and for security, but it was almost always unlocked during the day. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was officially dissolved in September. The new neighborhood association that replaced it had no enforcement power and no mandatory fees. Property values, despite Veronica's dire predictions, actually increased. Turns out people liked living in a neighborhood without an authoritarian HOA. I settled into a peaceful routine. My tractor collection grew by 2 more vintage John Deeres that I found at an estate sale in Wisconsin. I restored them in my barn, which remained standing and intact. Every time I walked past it, I thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. Herbert and I became close friends. We'd have coffee most mornings and talk about the neighborhood, local politics, and his boat that he'd moved back to his side yard. Nobody bothered him about it anymore. Martha Chen stopped by one afternoon in late October with a pie and a thank you card signed by 43 Meadowbrook residents. "We wanted you to know how much we appreciate what you did," she said. "You stood up when the rest of us were too afraid." "I was just protecting my property," I said. "You were protecting all of us." The lawsuit the HOA had filed was dismissed with prejudice, meaning they could never file it again. I countersued for legal fees and harassment. We settled for $75,000, paid by the HOA's insurance company. I used that money to pave my private road properly and install better lighting. I also donated $20,000 to the new neighborhood association to maintain the common areas in Meadowbrook. Dennis and I celebrated the settlement over beers at a bar in Cedar Rapids. "You know," he said, "in all my years practicing law, this is the wildest case I've ever worked. You owned the road the entire time. I still can't believe they tried to burn down my barn. Some people can't handle being told no, especially when they're used to everyone doing what they say." What happens to the HOA board members who weren't involved? Nothing criminal, but several are facing civil suits from other residents. Turns out Veronica wasn't the only one abusing her authority, just the only one crazy enough to commit arson. I raised my glass. To property rights and reasonable neighbors. And to knowing when to stand your ground, Dennis added. That winter was peaceful. Snow fell, I plowed my road with my old Ford tractor, and life in the neighborhood continued without drama. Former Meadowbrook residents would wave as they drove past, using the road that had caused so much conflict. But now it was just a road again, not a symbol of authority or control. I got a letter from Veronica in January. It came from the women's prison in Mitchellville. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly coherent and remorseful. She talked about her therapy sessions in prison, how she'd come to recognize her need for control and how it had spiraled into obsession. She apologized for what she'd done, acknowledged that she'd destroyed her own life and hurt so many others. She didn't ask for forgiveness or understanding, just wanted me to know that she finally understood how wrong she'd been. I never responded. Some things can't be fixed with an apology. Spring came, and I was in my barn working on restoring a 1958 International Harvester when I heard someone call out. I walked outside to find a young couple standing by my gate. They were in their early 30s, professionally dressed. "Can I help you?" I asked. The woman smiled. "We're looking at a house in the neighborhood. The realtor told us about what happened last year. We just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For fighting back," the man said. "We've lived under 2 different HOAs and both were nightmares. We were hesitant about moving here until we heard the HOA was dissolved. The realtor said you were the reason why. We talked for a while. They were both teachers, moving to the area for jobs at a nearby school. They bought the house 2 weeks later and became good neighbors. They were exactly the kind of people the neighborhood needed, folks who wanted community without control. The 1-year anniversary of the attempted arson passed quietly. There was a small article in the Cedar Rapids Gazette about it, reflecting on how the case had sparked conversations about HOA reform across Iowa. Several other communities had dissolved their HOAs or significantly reformed their bylaws. The legislature was even considering new laws to provide more oversight and restrict HOA powers. Change happens slowly, but it happens. On a warm day in June, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Herbert walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might like some company," he said. "Always." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and pink. "You ever regret it?" Herbert asked. Fighting them instead of just moving the tractor, I thought about it. About the stress, the threats, the fear when I realized someone was trying to burn down my barn. About the money spent on lawyers and security systems. No, I said finally. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That tractor still runs, like a dream. Want to take it for a spin? Herbert grinned. You know what I do. We walked down to where my 1972 John Deere sat, still parked in the same spot where this whole thing started. I climbed up, fired up the engine, and it roared to life with that distinctive sound that only old tractors make. Herbert sat on the fender, and we drove down my private road, the road I owned, the road that had caused so much trouble and ultimately brought a community together. The evening was perfect. The neighborhood was quiet, and my tractor was right where it belonged. As we drove back and I parked the tractor in its usual spot, I thought about everything that had happened. An HOA had tried to tow my tractor, not realizing I owned the road they were standing on. That one fact, buried in old deed records, had been my salvation. Property rights mattered. The law mattered. And standing up to bullies mattered, even when those bullies had authority and money and legal threats. I'd won, but more importantly, the neighborhood had won. Freedom from tyranny, even small-scale suburban tyranny, was worth fighting for. Herbert headed home, and I went inside to make dinner. Through my kitchen window, I could see my tractor sitting in the driveway, right where it had always been, right where it would stay. My phone buzzed with a text from Dennis. Beer next week. I've got another client asking about HOA disputes. Might want to hear your story. I smiled and typed back. Anytime. I've got plenty to share. The sky darkened, stars came out, and my security cameras kept their silent watch over my property. But there was no more threat, no more conflict. Just a man, his land, his tractors, and the peace that comes from knowing you stood your ground when it mattered. Some people collect stamps. Some collect coins. I collected vintage tractors and, apparently, property rights victories. I was fine with both. The gate at the end of my driveway stood as a monument to that victory, but it also served as a reminder that private property means something. That rights aren't just words on paper. That communities work best when people respect each other and the law, instead of trying to impose their will through fear and fines. I never became famous beyond that brief moment in the news cycle. I never gave speeches or wrote a book about my experience. I just went back to being Yates Ingram, a guy who restored tractors and minded his own business on his own land. But every time someone drove down my road, every time a neighbor stopped by to chat, every time I saw the dissolved HOA notices posted in Meadowbrook Estates, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had made a difference, not by being a hero, but by simply refusing to give up what was rightfully mine. And that old 1972 John Deere, it still sits in my driveway, visible from the road. A symbol of stubbornness, sure, but also a symbol of principle, of property rights, and of what happens when ordinary people stand up to those who abuse authority. Sometimes, the smallest battles matter the most. Sometimes, refusing to move a tractor changes everything. I raised my coffee mug in a solo toast to that thought, sitting on my porch as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow I'd work on restoring another tractor. Maybe I'd drive into town and see Dennis. Perhaps I'd check on Herbert and his boat. Life would continue, peaceful and quiet, in a neighborhood that had learned the hard way that freedom and respect matter more than manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes. The story of the HOA that tried to tow my tractor but didn't realize I owned the road would be told for years in Cedar Rapids and beyond. It would become legend, cautionary tale, and inspiration all at once. Parents would tell their kids about standing up for what's right. Real estate agents would mention it when discussing the neighborhood. Law professors might even use it as a case study in property rights. But for me, it was just life. My life on my land with my tractors. Simple, peaceful, free. And that was exactly how I wanted it.